Cast your mind back to the early 90s. It was a time of conflict, where Sega and Nintendo were battling it out in the video game console market.
It was the Super Nintendo versus the Sega Genesis, and the companies were playing dirty.
Genesis does
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
As the battle raged on, both companies tried to outdo each other by producing more technically advanced video games on their 16-bit machines. Ultimately, by the mid-90s, Nintendo won, selling 49 million units to Sega's 40.
While the 16-bit battle was over, a new conflict was about to begin, one set in the third dimension.
You are approaching Saturn. You are only seconds away.
Sega Saturn. Sega Saturn.
Yep, 3D was now the big thing, and Sega was going to bring it to the homes with their new video game console,
Sega Saturn.
To support the new system, Sega asked its first-party studios for game ideas.
Yukio Futatsuji, who had only been with Sega for the past 2 years, pitched several concepts, including one about an armored dragon. Sega said, yep, sounds great, and he put him in charge.
With a small team of 15 people, Team
Andromeda?
Andromeda?
I don't think so. I like to say Andromeda.
I'm just going to say TA. TA was formed and they got to work on a new video game called Panzer Dragoon. The first Panzer Dragoon was released in 1995. My gosh, time has flown by.
I know.
Just like the dragons, it flies by.
I was 1 year old when it came out. It was an on-rail shooter similar to games like Star Fox and Space Harrier. However, instead of playing a spaceship or a guy flying around with a friggin' laser gun, you played as a fearsome armored dragon, shooting down creatures in a post-apocalyptic world.
The game did have a story involving you stopping a dark dragon from activating an agent tower or something. But honestly, you don't play Panzer Dragoon for the story, you play it for the action and the killer music.
The game was a launch title for the Sega Saturn in North America, one of only 6 games. The reason there were so few launch titles was because Sega released the system 4 months before its scheduled release date.
A surprise launch.
No, launch.
Oh, launch. A surprise launch. This resulted in retailers being very angry with Sega, and third-party developers feeling kind of left out.
Granted, I mean, the Nintendo 64 had like only 3 games at launch, and everyone knew when that was coming out, so I don't think 6 is that bad, honestly.
In your book.
What do I know? I'm not a professional.
No, so shut up.
Anyway, Panzer Dragoon saw players fly around fully rendered 3D environments, from a sunken city to a desert and a forest.
It may not look like much now, but this was groundbreaking stuff at the time. One of the neat features that separated Panzer Dragoon from other on-rail shooters was the ability for 360-degree aiming.
By pressing the shoulder buttons, players were able to look to their sides and behind them to shoot down enemies from all angles. The game also featured a lock-on targeting system, enabling players to target multiple enemies at once and let them have it! Very satisfying.
To top it off, the game featured many exciting boss battles and an incredible soundtrack. Seriously, the music is so good in this game, we've got it on Spotify.
Yes. At the time of release, Panzer Dragoon was very well received. Critics loved the overall presentation of the game, as well as its tight, arcade-focused gameplay. Some thought the game was a bit too simple, but even they couldn't argue that the game's original art direction was something to behold. Most of the character designs were handled by Manabu Kusunoki, who drew inspiration from multiple sources such as the French artist Mobius and even David Lynch's Dune, which would explain all the sandworms in level 2. All these inspirations came together to create a truly unique looking game.
All these inspirations came together to create
I just said that.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. When you said Mobius, I was just thinking of Sonic the Hedgehog. While the game didn't sell as well as Sega hoped, they greenlit future sequels anyway. However, before we move on into the second installment of the franchise, we need to cover a more obscure release. Because in the same year, Panzer Dragoon also arrived on the Tiger R-Zone.
In case you're wondering, the R-Zone was a portable video game console released by Tiger. It was designed to cash in on the virtual reality fad that was in full swing, thanks in part to the hype surrounding Nintendo's Virtual Boy.
However, much like Nintendo's creation, the system flopped because no one wants to play video games with a red tinge.
Well, maybe some do.
Is it red tinge?
Well, everything's red.
Why is it red tinge?
I don't know. Anyway, Sega released a Panzer Dragoon game for it. Unsurprisingly, the game was not developed by Team Andromeda, which explains why the game lacked the visual pizzazz of its console counterpart. You can find some gameplay on this one on YouTube, although honestly, I don't know what's going on. It's just bleeps and bloops, and the dragon just flaps its wings. It just doesn't look very good, to be honest with you.
Moving on, Team A got to work on a sequel, and a year later, Panzer Dragoon 2, Zwei. Either way, it stands for 2, so Panzer Dragoon 2 was released. Like its predecessor, this too was an on-rail shooter. However, this time the gameplay was expanded, with branching paths and levels, and a new berserker attack, in which players could unleash a fury of lasers when their power meter was full.
The dragon also had the ability to level up and morph throughout the game, flashing white and becoming bigger and better. A bit like me after 6 rum and cokes.
Story-wise, Panzer Dragoon 2 was actually a prequel to the previous game. But you don't play Panzer Dragoon for the story, you play it for the action and the killer music.
Granted, the music wasn't as rich this time around, but it was still great, and it actually dictated the tone for the rest of the series.
The musical tone.
The musical tone.
You forgot to say musical tone.
Let me say that again.
No, it's done.
No, I wasn't happy with it.
No, it's done. Next bit.
Oh. The development of Panzer Dragoon 2 started in early 1995, and was actually developed alongside another installment in the series, something we'll get to shortly. Team Andromeda decided to make the game a little easier to make it more accessible, and added a richer story due to fan interest in the universe. But like we said, we don't watch the cutscenes, we skip all of them.
Graphically, the game was a major improvement over the original. If players were impressed with the first one, the sequel will blow them away. Like seeing a talking fish for the first time.
Subscribe.
On top of that, the game had more replay value by introducing the Panzer's Box, which enabled you to customize numerous aspects of the game to your heart's content.
Where's Pandora's Box?
Well, it's actually called Panzer's Box in Panzer Dragoon 2. It's called Pandora's Box later. Critically, the game was very well received. Everyone thought it was better than the first. However, some thought the game was too easy, leading it to have very little longevity. Sales-wise, I'm not sure how well it did, because I can't find that information anywhere. But I'm sure it did well enough for production to continue on the next installment, Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Saga! Or as I used to call it, Panzer Dragoon Sega.
But before we get there was actually another game released in the same year called Panzer Dragoon Mini.
This was released for the Sega Game Gear exclusively in Japan. It saw players control a cute little dragon shooting down enemies and big bosses. You know, classic Panzer Dragoon gameplay. In a surprising twist, this dragon didn't have a rider, probably because the dragon was so small he would fall off if he rode him.
The game was primarily aimed at a younger market, and is generally considered a pretty meh entry in the franchise. However, you couldn't use meh to describe the next installment in the series.
Actually, stop there. We're missing something.
Are we?
Yes, because in 1996, a Panzer Dragoon anime was also released, direct to video.
Oh.
It was a 30-minute film that followed the events of the first Panzer Dragoon game, adding in new characters to help expand the story.
Oh.
For example, there's a woman in it.
Oh.
Who becomes possessed by the Dark Dragon.
Oh. Generally, it's not very well regarded, but it's an interesting historical relic worth mentioning. The anime actually did get an English dub handled by ADV Films, who you might know as the people who did the English dub for the Sonic OVA, which, in my mind, is a flawed masterpiece. Do you think it's better than the new Sonic movie? The OVA?
There's a new Sonic anime movie?
No, the live-action Sonic movie.
That's a live-action Sonic movie? After all this, the series went quiet for a bit, as TA was hard at work on the next installment, and eventually, in 1998, Panzer Dragoon Sega Saga was released on the Sega Saturn. The game featured a richer story than the previous installments, following Edge, a young mercenary who rides a dragon and gets into all sorts of misadventures with a mysterious girl named Azel. But you don't play Panzer Dragoon for the story, you play it for the action and killer music.
Well, actually, that was no longer true, because Saga was a role-playing game?
What?
This meant that the story was actually important.
Oh gosh.
Also, the on-rails action, the fluid on-rails action, gone. It was all gone. It was replaced in favor of a turn-based battle system, similar to Final Fantasy. Players were also able to fly around freely, being able to explore the desolate world of Panzer Dragoon and all its grim glory. You know what? It was actually pretty good. From the get-go, the team ditched the group of heroes save the world storytelling tropes typical of the genre.
Instead, the game focused on a small cast of characters who players grew close to, resulting in a more meaningful story. However, this approach ended up leading to issues with the battle system.
Typically in RPGs, you have a cast of characters with different strengths and weaknesses, which you swap in and out to battle enemies. Saga only had two characters, Edge and the Dragon. To work around this, the Dragon was given the ability to morph during battles, creating a wider variety of actions for the player to use.
A bit like Pokemon.
They were also given the ability to... What? No, Pokemon, you can swap your Pokemon out, so that's not like Pokemon. They were also given the ability to strategically move around enemies, enabling them to dodge enemy attacks and charge up their own abilities. It was a battle system that felt both traditional and unique.
The desire to make a Panzer Dragoon RPG was initially pushed by Sega, as they felt it was important that the Sega Saturn had a killer RPG to rival the PlayStation and the Final Fantasy VII. Unfortunately, the development of the game proved to be a strain on the team, as they worked hard to push the Saturn to its technical limits.
Unlike the previous two installments, which were handled by small teams, the Saga team was large, consisting of many staff members who did not know each other. According to the series director Yukio Fatsusugi, there were endless disputes between the designers and the programmers.
The programmers wanted to build upon the shooting mechanics established in the previous entries, but the designers wanted to explore the visual possibilities of a 3D world. These sorts of disputes resulted in the game being delayed several times.
With high expectations from Sega, the team was faced with intense pressure. At the height of production, staff would be sleeping in their offices or would relieve stress by playing fighting games on the SNK Neo Geo arcade cabinet. Things escalated when two staff members died during production, one from a motorcycle accident and another from suicide. The director attributed these passings to stress, and while there were considerations to stop making the game, the team pushed on.
The game was eventually released in 1998, but unfortunately, it was too late for Saga and the Saturn.
The Sega Saturn by this point was written off as a failure, with Sega instead focusing their efforts on their next console, the Dreamcast.
As a result, Saga was released in limited quantities, resulting in very poor sales. However, those who did manage to get a copy thought it was the best thing since sliced bread.
Critics and fans were impressed with the game's story, gameplay, and overall presentation, citing its atmosphere and music as highlights. It has since been regarded as the best Sega Saturn game ever, one of the best RPGs ever, and also one of the best video games ever.
Due to the game's limited release, Saga has become a highly sought-after collector's item, selling for very outrageous high prices on online stores. We did see it once at Comic-Con, but Dexter said no.
I just couldn't fork out $300 for a video game.
Yeah, only $300.
After the game's release, Sega disbanded Team Andromeda, with some of the staff being moved to Smilebit, one of Sega's other developers. Fatsugi, on the other hand, left Sega, moving to Konami, then Sony, then Microsoft, before eventually forming his own company, Grounding Inc. But more on him later. Back to Smilebit.
Smilebit got to work on the next installment in the Panzer Dragoon series, which came out in 2002 on the Microsoft Xbox?
Well, it turns out the Dreamcast was another flop for the company, despite having a great library of games. As a result, Sega abandoned making consoles and instead became a third-party developer.
Orta returned to the roots of the series, being an on-rail shooter where players flew around on an armored dragon and blasted enemies. This one had a story involving a teenage girl fighting an evil empire while riding a mysterious dragon. But you don't play Panzer Dragoon for the story, you play for the action and the killer music. Sing!
Unless you're Saga.
Of course, unless you're Saga.
The gameplay was similar to the first two entries, with a few new features. One such feature was the ability to
morph your dragon into 3 different forms. Base Wing, which is the standard form, Heavy Wing, which is the more offensive but less mobile, or Glide Wing, the most offensive and most racist dragon you could ever see.
The dragon also had the ability to speed up or slow down, which was incredibly useful during boss encounters.
These new features helped add some neat strategy elements to the intense shoot-'em-up action.
Top that off with some truly spectacular visuals, and you had yourself one fabulous game.
One fabulous game.
Critics agreed too. The game was met with critical acclaim, with even IGN declaring it to be the best on-rail shooter ever. No one could even complain about the game's length this time.
This time round, the main story had 10 episodes instead of 7, with a grading system to encourage players to replay levels to beat their high scores.
There was also the return of the Pandora's Box, which featured side missions, bonus materials such as concept art and a cutscene viewer. Even the original Panzer Dragoon was included as a bonus unlockable.
Well, you say no one complained about the length, but FHM in their review said the game was too short.
What are they doing reviewing games? They're like a men's mag. After Orta, the franchise went quiet, with no news or future installments or anything really. Nothing.
The only Panzer Dragoon related release was 4 years later in 2006, which saw the first entry be ported to the PlayStation 2 as part of the Sega Ages series.
The game was an enhanced port of Panzer Dragoon, featuring both the original game, which was almost identical to the Sega Saturn original, and a new Arrange mode, which featured minor graphical improvements. The game also saw the return of the Pandora's Box, enabling players to tweak parts of the main game, as well as access bonus concept art. After this, there was nothing for a long time. The most significant appearance Panzer Dragoon made was in Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, released in 2012.
The game featured a racetrack based on Panzer Dragoon, which saw the blue armored dragon fly around a bit and destroy the racetrack for the lulz.
What's happening? What's happening?
Panzer Dragoon also made an appearance in the Sonic the Hedgehog Archie comics, appearing in a crossover alongside the Blue Blur and... who's the other guy again? Oh, wait. Mega Man.
Oh, I hate him in Smash Bros. However, do you remember Futsasugi in Grounding Inc.?
Nope.
Well, it turns out him and his team were cooking up a dragon game for the Xbox 360. First unveiled at the 2011 Tokyo Game Show, he showed off Project Draco, an on-rail shooter where players fly around on a dragon and shoot stuff. Sound familiar? Later retitled Crimson Dragon, the game was poised as a spiritual successor to Panzer Dragoon.
I love this game. It's my favorite Kinect game of all time. Like, seriously, I seriously cannot
But it's not a
stop
Kinect
playing.
game.
What?
I don't know what you were playing when it moved to the Xbox One and the Kinect controls were dropped.
No, I'm sure I was still in the game. I was playing this game with the dragon on the Xbox One.
No,
You're flying
no.
around. No, I'm sure of it. Either way, I love Crimson Dragon. I give it a 10 out of 10. I think it's the best game ever made.
Yes. Thank you. Now go back into self-isolation. So just to clarify, it was made for the Kinect sensor. However, it was eventually moved as a launch title for the Xbox One, and the Kinect controller was dropped for a traditional controller.
It was impossible because I played it with the Kinect stuff.
Just go away!
This wasn't Panzer Dragoon, but honestly, it was gonna be the best we were gonna get. You know, after all, it's been handled by the original Panzer Dragoon creator and even featured music by the Saga and Orta composer, Sori Kabayashi. Honestly, what could go wrong?
A lot. The game was released as a launch title for the Xbox One and was unfortunately met with very mixed reviews.
Oh.
Critics noted the last-gen visuals,
Oh.
poor level design,
Oh.
and sluggish controls as major turn-offs.
Oh. After that, there was more silence, and to be honest, it was quite easy to write the series off as finished. However, suddenly in 2018, an article appeared online stating that Polish developer Forever Entertainment were going to be remaking Panzer Dragoon 1 and 2 in full HD.
Most of us thought this was just a prank and a hoax. But, in June 2019, during Nintendo's E3 Direct, this happened.
Yep, much like a certain long dormant YouTube channel, Panzer Dragoon was back. This time being released as a timed exclusive for the Nintendo Switch.
For most gamers, they didn't see what all the fuss was about, but for fans like us, it was a big frickin' deal. Dexter Morton cried.
Yes.
And I screamed.
Yes.
As soon as we heard the first couple of seconds, we're like, Panzer Dragoon!
Yes.
Ah!
In another shocking twist, the game was shadow dropped onto the Nintendo Switch eShop in March 2020, resulting in a 14-year gap since the last Panzer Dragoon release. Eager fans rushed to buy it and revisit this beloved game with a fresh visual overhaul. Except while the visuals were generally well received, the gameplay was met with a very mixed response. Players found that the game's controls were, to put it simply, lame. I mean, a bit like me in my everyday life. The targeting reticle didn't feel smooth, the dragon bopped up and down too much, resulting in an obscured view of enemies. The shoulder buttons had input lag. People were also critical of the game missing certain features from the original. Even the remix soundtrack by Suguru Kawayashi was absent too, despite being mentioned prior to the game's release. Let's just say fans were not happy. Neither were the critics who, while grateful Panzer Dragoon was back, were disappointed by the game's shortcomings.
Thankfully, developer Forever Entertainment took all the fan feedback on board.
Literally every single criticism.
And they patched the game in May.
Yes.
Suddenly the controls were smooth and responsive, the lag was gone, those missing extras were back in, the remixed music was there. It took a while, but the game was finally in an impressive and highly playable state.
Yes. Which brings us to today. With the Panzer Dragoon remake being a financial success for Forever Entertainment, and with a remake of the second one in development, it's actually quite an exciting time to be a fan of the series. Like, we actually have something to look forward to. There's even a Panzer Dragoon VR game coming.
Where it goes from here will be very interesting. After all, a lot of fans are clamoring for a remake of Panzer Dragoon Saga, but there's no word on whether that game will actually become reality.
Regardless, we'll just have to wait and see. For now at least, we know we have something to look forward to, and that's better than nothing. Keep watching the skies.
Make sure to buy a dragon!